Welcome back to the Creating Distance podcast hosted by TA Sales. I'm your host, Tom Alamo. Some people call me Tommy Tahoe. And each week on Fridays, we'll be bringing you an episode to break down with salespeople and sales leaders the top tips, tactics, strategies, stories that you need to get to the next level of your career and up-level yourself. So let's get into it.
All right, now we've got the founder and CEO of CoachEM on the Creating Distance podcast, Colum Lundt. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Doing good. Working out some technical difficulties here on an in-person podcast, but excited to have you on. We got introduced by Sarah Kiley a while back. You're a I would call you like kind of a sneaky underground legend of the sales and sales training world, which people are going to hear from your come-up story, building your own sales training business, selling it to Sandler, working in the C-suite at Sandler, helping to grow their business, now building your own sales coaching technology company. So I've got a lot to learn from you. I'm excited to dive in. Why don't we start with first sales job? How'd you get into the industry? Did you fall ass backwards into it like most of us, or did it come naturally to you? And was it part of like your aligned progression from when you were young?
Yeah, good question to start off. I fell into it. I thought I would be in law enforcement. Most of my family was in law enforcement. And found out I was having a baby. Wasn't just a random accident, but we found out, my wife and I, at the time, when I was a senior college, and I was like, what am I going to do? So opened the paper. I was in Worcester, started making some dials, and landed a job with Shawmut Bank, which eventually got bought by Fleet, which became Bank of America. And so it was there that I was put into a telesales role. So that was really my first sales role. It was kind of like upselling people on, getting the credit cards or line of credit, that sort of thing. So that was the first job I had. And then I was chipping away at my degree. And this woman in a class I was taking at Merrimack College, it was a business ethics course. She said, hey, my company, she made an announcement at the end, my company is looking for people, anyone might be interested. And she had a couple of people she had sort of talent spotted. She was manager, and I wound up taking a job working for her. So yeah, so late 90s is when I first got into it.
Okay. And early success, or were you stumbling, or how'd it go in the beginning?
I mean, so luckily I had some early success. I had worked a ton of jobs since I was 13. And one thing that I always sort of knew inherently was I can control how hard I work. Mm-hmm. And so when I got in these roles, and I had obviously a lot of pressure, being a new dad and new family, I kind of looked around and knew I can outwork any of these people. And fortunately, that second company I got into was called Seek Consulting, which they changed the name to Darwin Partners, and then it became a company called Dextrous. They put in a fantastic training program. Mm. So I was able to sort of learn good habits from the beginning.
Yeah. So how old were you when you?
So I was 20. I was 20.
Okay. So it wasn't like you had bounced around and did different jobs. You were about the same age as everyone else, but just maybe had a little bit more to.
Yeah, I had a little bit more
to play for as a kid, right?
Yeah, I had a little bit more life experience too. I had, I paid my way through college. I had run out of money, so I enlisted in the Marine Corps. So I did about a year. I went into the reserve. So you do basically, boot camp, Marine combat training, then you do your MOS school. I was in infantry, and then you kind of go to your unit. And I killed a few extra months working as a recruiter which is an interesting story. So that was like a year. So when I took this job, I had a little bit extra life experience, but I had a lot more motivation than some of the other recently graduated.
What do you think that changed about the first year? Like what did you notice maybe that you did differently than everyone else in the early days because of that motivation?
My pace was a lot different.
Yeah.
My pace was a lot different. I could grind out more calls. I would work through lunch. I just had a fifth gear, I guess.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I think I was good at figuring out what I could control, what I couldn't. Yeah. And so I knew I could control my pace and how hard I worked. And so in subsequent years, I started thinking of the world as in this acronym AIR, activities, indicators, and results. So activities are those behaviors that are 100% in the control of the rep
Yeah.
or the manager, whoever, right? It's like whatever those things are that you are 100% in control of, and you can't control other things.
Yeah.
I always use the example of referrals, which, by the way, I learned in the early days, an interesting story about that. But referrals, you can control how many you ask for. Like, let's say you say, I'm going to ask for 10 a week. The operative word is ask. I can control that.
Yep.
I can't control whether you'll give them to me or not.
Right.
You know, so an indicator of how effective I am might be how many I get. So I ask for 10, I get 5. And then the result, the R, is how many conversations come out of that.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was the difference. Is sort of I just kind of focused on what I could control, which is activity.
Was that part of that initial sales training?
No.
Or did you just come up with like that acronym?
That acronym just developed over the years, but the company, that second company I went to work for, they basically laid it all out. They said, hey, if you want the seat, it's an expensive seat, minimum of 60 calls a day. Like they had all these metrics that they knew literally down to a fine science. So like if you do these things, this is the commission you will make.
Yeah. And it's like, we've got it all mapped out for you. All you've got to do is make the call, send the email, probably some creativity to what you can do once you're on the phone and things like that. But it's
exactly.
They kind of take the guesswork out of how do you become successful in sales.
Totally agree. They did. Yeah. It was basically this idea that sales is not easy, but it's simple.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy, but it's simple.
Yeah.
So it's basic sales math.
Yeah.
You know, X amount of activity yields Y amount of meetings yields Z amount of opportunities and, you know, revenue and deals. So it's sort of like fundamental.
Yeah. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. So you have that, you know, one or a few sales jobs. You do well. Then you started your own business, which I think was a technology, maybe not a reseller, but more of like an implementation company.
Yeah, actually, technically, I left that company. I was doing really well. I left to go into business for myself, sales training in 2002, roughly, and totally bombed. And ran a bunch of credit card. Yeah, it was affiliated with Sandler.
Yeah.
But you have your own business, and so you basically consult and train on your own, and abject failure. And looking back on it, I did all the behaviors, but I was comfortable calling on companies, larger entities, and the prescription they gave you when you started is call on small fry mom and pop. The model Sandler had was sort of like local franchise, and
why was that the model? Because they do work with big companies.
Oh yeah, they do, but
not new franchise owners like you.
Right. In local markets, the way they had it structured was you'd have what they call President's Club, and everyone needs to learn how to sell. I don't care if you're a CPA or if you are a little IT support service company. Everybody needs to learn how to sell. Daniel Pink wrote a great book on it.
Yeah.
To Sell as Human.
Yeah.
And it made sense that these people who never had any education in sales would need to learn some of the fundamentals just to grow their business. And so that model was, hey, you reach out to all these local solopreneurs type of thing, invite them down, they get a briefing, and then based on that, a certain percentage of them will convert, and they'll come every week. It's like a master's degree in selling. It's a pretty good model, and it's been fantastic for a lot of people. But that just wasn't my thing. I absolutely hated going to these networking events and Chamber of Commerce meetings. It just wasn't my thing. I had been used to my whole career kind of blasting into companies and so forth. And
you want a big deal.
I did, and I got us in front of a lot of people, but in that particular time, the market was brutal. I don't know if you recall, but in early 2001, you had a real softening in the market, and then 9/11 happened, and then it was like brutal. And so, we really didn't have our act together, kind of getting those bigger deals. And so I got a call from a recruiter who offered me a job working for a European company to run sales for the East Coast. And I remember getting off the phone with it was actually the recruiter, and my wife goes, "How'd it go?" I go, "It went really well." And she's like, "Does it offer a salary?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "Does it offer benefits?" I said, "Yeah." She's like, "You took it, right?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not there yet, but if it could." So that first company I started was a bomb. Then I did that, and then I started my own company, which was a company called Bridge Energy Group that we eventually sold to Accenture.
So what is the walk me through the rough timeline of you tried the Sandler franchise.
Yep.
It's an abject failure.
Yep.
And then I don't think you did take that company that you just talked about, the European running the
Nope.
sales. So you have abject failure, and then you decide to start another company. I don't know how many kids you have at this point too, so there's probably some internal pressure within the family to maybe go get a VP of sales job.
Yeah.
So like walk me through that period of...
That was absolutely the way it went down. So I basically worked for this company that got bought by a U.S. firm eventually called We Localize for a few years, put everything I learned into practice and had success there. And it was in the software localization space. So it was interesting. It was fascinating to me. You learn about different cultures, about language. There's a huge technical component. I had Sun Microsystems and Macromedia and a couple of companies that are like no longer around.
Yeah.
HP, I guess, and HP. But I always wanted to do my own thing.
Yeah.
And so I had that failure. Took this job. I was in that for 2 or 3 years, and then decided to start my own company. I read a book that I got for Christmas one year called Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Classic.
Yeah, and so something resonated with me, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to start my own company. Yeah, and so there was 2 guys that were going to start it with me. My house was centrally located, and one of the guys just didn't show. And so I called him up and he's like, hey, I decided I'm not interested. So I'm like, all right. So me and the other guy decided to do it. And we started that company. We grew that. We raised capital.
He just didn't show up to the first
Just didn't show up.
Work, you mean?
Yeah. Well, no, just it was about like a founding meeting.
And he just,
it was a no-show. And I'm like, where are you? And he's like, he got cold feet.
Yeah.
So we had success with that company. It was not easy, but we sold into the utilities. We wound up eventually selling it to Accenture. And that's when I started Revenue Performance Group, the little sort of take 2 at consulting and training B2B sales organizations.
What told you in your mind after abject failure to success, you sell to a major company, you want to start another bit, you have the bug, you're not going to go back and work for someone at this point, most likely. So you could start a whole number of types of companies. Why go back to like a sales training, revenue performance when you already failed at that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, in this time I had 2 partners, and one of them already had relationships at Oracle. So we had sort of a feather nest, so to speak, to kind of get right in there. Yeah, exactly. And the other lesson was we decided that the riches are in the niches. So we said, okay, we all know technology. Well, let's go after the technology space first and foremost. Let's come up with a clear ideal client profile, be maniacal about going after that. And let's parlay the relationships we build to get new clients. And for good or bad, a lot of the folks that we worked with would leave or somehow moved on, took other roles. And there are people literally that I trained back in 2014, 2015 that are like CROs at this point, which is kind of astonishing. But yeah, people would leave and they'd move on. And we practiced what we preached in terms of getting referrals. So every time we trained someone, we were very focused and disciplined about getting referrals out of that and then minding those relationships to get new business. And so that's how that grew until we got a call from the CEO of Sandler who said, hey, your little company is selling more Sandler licenses than the country of Canada and Mexico combined. And so would you consider selling to us? And we eventually did.
And then we'll get off the this part of the selfish entrepreneurial questions in a second. If you had one bit of knowledge or advice that you learned on that second, or in that case it's your third go, second success, that you wish you knew on your first time, because I'm you in the first go. I don't know how old you were, but I'm 32, 2.5 years into building the business, wanting it to be successful, wanting the outcome that you had. If you had to go back and tell me or tell the first column of starting that business, 1 or 2 tips or 1 or 2 differences, what would they be?
In that first iteration, I focused on what I wanted to go after, not what I should have been going after. So I would say get crystal clear on your ideal client profile that you feel comfortable selling to, and then be super disciplined about not going after other things, no matter how enticing they are. I also was fortunate that I had a partner, in the second go around, I had two partners that were fantastic.
Yeah.
And that helped a lot because it wasn't just me grinding it out. It was two people that we could lean on each other and we would help in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
So I would say the key is defining the ideal client profile, being absolutely maniacal about sticking to it. Find a couple people that you can really trust, even if they're not your full-time partners, accountability partners.
Yeah.
Get really great at getting referrals. I think in today's day and age, and we could talk more about it, depending on where the conversation goes, but I think what's old is new again.
Yeah.
Getting in person,
So that's right.
blasting out calls,
Yeah.
and getting referrals are the keys to being successful in 2025 and into 2026. In the age of everything being artificial and operating off a two-dimensional screen, which I believe is similar to watching a log burning on a screen, right? A fireplace on a screen. You just don't get the warmth that you get from being in person. I think those three things are going to be critical. So the people who master those in today's day and age are going to be more successful than their competitors.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get to referrals in a second, but I was talking with a friend of mine who's a RVP. I'll say he's at Salesforce, and we're talking about, just kind of shooting the shit. And he's telling me about his best rep, President's Club, like top 1% President's Club at Salesforce, crushing it. And we're just kind of sharing stories. And he's like, "Hey, we were supposed to have this big meeting. And then it was actually going to be like a big dinner in San Francisco. And this rep, who is all by the numbers, outstanding rep, calls him an hour before the dinner. And it's like, I'm not feeling well. I can't do it. They're getting cold feet about their first ever in-person meeting because their whole career has been post-COVID, Zoom world, know how to sell on a computer, but I've never shook the hand of my economic buyer in person and sat down with them and talked commercials or whatever, talked about their family for 3 hours at dinner or whatever it is. And it is becoming a lost art. And so I do feel like the people that are able to, like, if I was starting a tech company from scratch, like, damn sure, SDR team is in person, the sales team's in person. If we have the average deal size that, helps it, like we're getting in person to see clients, referrals, to your point, I think what's old is new again is completely right. Yeah.
Those who sold in person in the past will recognize what I'm about to say. Great things happen when you're on site. Great things happen. So first of all, I used to ask people when I would do training back in those days, I'd say, how many of you have had someone that you actually talked to on the phone completely ghost you? And you get a bunch of show of hands, right? You set a follow-up meeting and they're no show. How many of you have met someone in person and then got ghosted by that person? Hardly anyone. Yeah. There's something about being in person, being across the table from someone, shaking their hand, looking them in the eye. That's just different. Number one. Number two is back in the day, we were trained to sort of sign in on the ledger book up front at the front desk, and you're kind of like going through the pages trying to see who else came, which are your competitors, who they met with. I've literally gotten deals that way. And so I've made calls from the lobby. So I think that approach, sometimes you're sitting in the lobby and you're waiting for your person to come down and then you see someone else. And so I think that it is a bit of a lost art, but this is just my opinion. I think people are going to crave that more and more. They're going to enjoy meeting for a coffee or a lunch or in person because it's now become so rare. Agreed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. What's your number one tip for getting more referrals?
Asking. It's like Wayne Gretzky said, you miss 100% of the shots you never take.
Yeah.
So, first time you and I talked, I asked you for a referral.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and you got it.
I asked for referrals often, no.
Yeah.
So quick funny story about that. Where this sunk in was back in that early job, I was young.
Yeah.
And I was working for this company, Seek Consulting. And there was a guy who worked for Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance. His name was Walter.
Okay.
And he would ask me, shout out to Walter. So he was always asking for referrals, and it sort of clicked. He would ask me every time. stroke my ego a little bit. He'd say, hey, Colum, who else is crushing it here? Who else is not going to cover off the ball? So he'd give you that little ego stroke, or as my kids call it, glazing. He give you.
Is that a term?
Yeah, that's what. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nicole says yes. Okay, it's a term.
Yeah. So, he'd do that little ego stroke, right?
Okay.
And by the way, just from a psychology perspective, we don't get as many ego strokes as we'd like. So it's always good to give someone a little stroke, right? So he'd say that all the time.
Yeah.
And so I gave him referrals, but every single time, and I was a customer, right? And I saw him nonstop at my company. He was always meeting with someone in the cafeteria, always in the lobby or the cafeteria. And the guys finally noticed, they were talking and they're like, hey, dude, you know Walter? You know, he's a couple years older than us, right? So, hey, dude, you know Walter drives a 8 Series BMW? He's got like a $2 million home in Sudbury. Like people would notice.
Yeah.
And I got thrust into a role at one point where I really need to become great at referrals. And it kind of like just all clicked for me, is that was how he grew his business. That's how he was so successful. Yeah. He was always asking for referrals. So you asked me for the tip. I'd say you got to ask every time. It's got to be part of your routine, like muscle memory, like night follows day. You're always asking for a referral. The mindset that some people have is, oh, I can't ask until we do so much work. And, I think that's bollocks. You can ask off a no.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like what the worst that's going to happen is they're like, actually, I don't know if I've ever even had someone that's just said flat no. Usually the worst is like, let me think about it and I'll come back to you.
Right.
And, to me, that's like, you might have asked just a generic, do you know anyone? Or,
right.
Who do you know? And I think it would be better if you had someone specific in mind and there's some like other, more advanced ways. But even if you just ask, who else do you know? I like the ego trick that's killing it. Like, I'd love to work with other great, IT companies, IT directors like you, Colum, who else do you know? The worst they're going to say is, I don't know. Let me come back to you. And, you can just re-ask them the next time. Hey, I know I brought it up. I saw you used to work at Fidelity. Do you know anyone over at Fidelity? And you can kind of guide it that way.
Absolutely. Part of, I think, what I learned is when you give someone a because, they're more likely to help you out. And there's a famous study on this. But suffice to say, if you create a little preamble and you were to say, hey, Tom, one of the ways we grow the business is through word of mouth. In fact, I may have gotten to you through word of mouth today. Based on that, now that you know a little bit more about what we do, who do you recommend I reach out to that might be open to, a brief informal conversation?
Yeah,
I definitely appreciate your advice on that. And now you're asking it in a way that's open-ended. You're giving them that little bit because up front. Yeah. And to your point, there are some people who are intellectually lazy. They're like, oh, let me think about it, and if you want to be a little aggressive, you can say, well, now that you're thinking about it, who comes to mind, right? and you press them, But here's the thing, like, I'm always willing to give a referral.
Yeah.
So part of it's like,
if you know the person, if you trust what they're doing.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And it's not like you're asking for their firstborn, You just want a conversation.
I'm not setting you up on a date with my brother. I'm just, it's a potential business.
Informal.
Intro conversation.
Exactly right. It's an informal information exchange. And so I think I'm a big fan of that's for
my first sales job, as the listeners will know, is selling Cutco in college.
Okay.
And Cutco knife.
No, what is it?
Nice. You seriously don't know?
Yeah, no.
You've been in sales training for 30 years?
Is it for like scissors, or is it like
Kintsu knives? Yeah, like kitchen cutlery.
Oh, okay.
It's actually a pyramid scheme.
Okay.
But the whole kind of like game plan is they get high school and college kids. It's 100% commission. And you do door to door and cold calling, similar to Northwestern Mutual, where you start with people you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole business it's all referrals. You're not really supposed to, you can cold call, but like you're supposed to start with as much of like people you know and
sure.
referrals. And so you're selling pretty expensive knives. And so I get incentives if I get 10 referrals, I'm able to throw in someone an ice cream scooper. Like, hey, Colum, I'll give you a piece of paper. If you could think of 10, I got this pizza cutter for you. If you think of 20, I got this extra knife for you,
Yeah.
So that's how they would incentivize us to just get as many, random people. So that's just a random
That's a good job to cut your teeth on.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
All right. So let's bring it back to the storyline. You dropped something in our prep call, and we didn't get too far into it. But just, I worked at Gong for several years, and we were talking a little bit about the early days. And apparently you were walking me through a scene where it's the early days of Gong. I'm not sure exactly the revenue size, maybe like single-digit millions or maybe even before that. Handful of sales reps. There's Ryan Longfield, the CRO. There's you. There's maybe the VP of Sales, Jameson. I'm not sure who else. And coming up with kind of like the sales playbook, which is now pretty legendary. So walk me through, like, set the scene for me of what that was.
Yeah, so I didn't work there, just to be clear.
Yeah.
We had worked with Ryan at LinkedIn, and then he brought us into Gong when he became the CRO. And essentially, I think we started talking with them. They were still in a WeWork. And then at one point, I found myself locked in a room for 2 or 3 days in San Francisco. All I can remember is this really good diner near there and some homeless people going crazy.
Sounds about right.
But so my colleague, this is when we had our company revenue performance group. If I remember correctly, at the time, the company was absolutely crushing the conversion rate of every proof of concept. Was like a one deal. It was almost like money in the bank, but it was getting to that point.
Yeah.
That was the trick. It was, I want to say, like almost a 5-month sales cycle type of thing. New technology.
It's almost like too good to be true for sales leaders.
Missionary selling, basically.
Yeah.
A lot of evangelism. And so I had met Iran, the COO, and we had met, I forget who else, but basically early on. And I was just like, wow, this technology is unbelievable. This is the holy grail from a sales training perspective, right? Because you can go in there and train them, but you don't know, did they really absorb it? You can do knowledge checks and so forth, but how much have they consumed? And most importantly, did they apply it? And now you could sort of close that loop. You could say, okay, we know we're struggling with X. We go train them on X, right?
Yeah.
How to improve. Then we can sort of measure on the back end whether or not they actually applied what they were taught.
Yeah.
And so that was an unbelievable product. And so we wound up doing a deal where we helped refactor the sales process, put it all into a playbook, and then did some training for the organization. And I remember we tried to negotiate a deal where we took like stock instead of cash. Immediately shut it down. But yeah, it was.
I was gonna say that was actually thinking while you were talking. I was like, man, I wish, or I bet he, wished he got some equity.
Oh yeah. No. But I gotta say, so fantastic product, but also a real, on the part of Ryan, a real willingness to open up, be open-minded about where outside perspective could help. And then I remember the sales leaders kind of cycling through. They'd come in and we kept whiteboarding the stuff to sort of refactor the process. And they did fantastic at execution, obviously. So
it feels to me, from being in the sales training consulting world and then being at Gong before, so I've sold to sales leaders probably the past 5-ish years. Feels like there's two types of sales leaders. There's like the Longfield, that he's got fantastic success from LinkedIn, now Gong, now Shopify, that probably still bring in a lot of people from the outside to help and like views himself with that beginner's mind. Mm-hmm. And then there's the sales leader that still might be as accomplished as him, or maybe more, maybe less, but kind of like holds the cards close to the vest and doesn't want that, and almost has that ego about them to want to do everything themselves. Do you find that to be true from your level of experience?
I do. And I think part of their calculus is, how big of a mess is this? Do I have time to tackle it all myself? So most of the sales leaders I work with over the years, or I've worked with over the years, can do most of what we come in and do.
Yeah.
The reason why they would hire us to do it is because they just don't have the bandwidth, or they need it done in an accelerated fashion. because they know the sort of Damocles is hanging over their head from day one. Most of these B2B, especially in enterprise, I think it's like 14 or 15 months the CROs are enrolled before they're shutting the door. So it's either bandwidth, time, or sometimes it's like if the uncle says something coming in from the outside, it lands a little different than when the dad says it type of thing.
Totally.
So those are the reasons. And then, of course, the last one is there's a cross-pollination of ideas. When you are working across companies, you cannot help but seeing little pockets of best practice.
Totally.
And some people are open to leveraging that and baking that into how they go to market.
You don't just want an echo chamber of this is, and oftentimes people hire people they used to work with before. And so, for example, at Gong, half the people at Gong worked at LinkedIn with Longfield and you recruited them over. So you can kind of get an echo chamber of, well, we all have the same, we've all pretty much worked at the same company the last 10 years. And so this is our process. So bringing people in on the outside, I think, helps to eliminate that. I want to pivot to what you're doing now with CoachEM. Founder, CEO of CoachEM. Tell us about the problem that you guys solve.
So prior to Sandler, when we had our little consulting company, we noticed this trend, and it just became magnified when I took over at Sandler. And that is that companies that beat everyone else in terms of the adoption, or even specific teams or orgs within a larger company where we would roll it out, were the ones where the managers were the most switched on.
Yeah.
So what do I mean by that? These are companies where the managers were in the room, sitting at the front without their phones, consuming information, asking questions, coming up afterwards or following up on a call, say, hey, how do I pull this through? How do I make sure I reinforce it? What do you recommend? Like they were the ones who were sort of, you could just tell. And those are the ones that sort of beat everybody else in terms of the actual implementation and adoption and the actual results.
Yeah.
And so I remember one specific manager who we trained at LogMeIn, and she had come in through acquisition of the GoToMeeting, the Citrix.
Yeah.
And they had some other methodology, and so when they amalgamated both teams, they said, "Hey, please go train all these managers." And there was one who asked me a ton of questions and was very skeptical. Wound up being the number one manager in the country after a year, and so we saw this trend.
Yeah.
People have talked to me about the philosophy at Blade Logic, which I believe got bought by BMC, and how whenever they were going to roll something out, they would roll it out to the managers first. And they made sure the managers were totally expert at whatever that thing is. Could be a new product, could be a skill, could be whatever. They made sure that they were trained and they were equipped and fully enabled and mastered whatever it was. And if you think about it, they were wildly successful, and there's loads of stories of people who came from that. And
that's like OG tech sales culture.
Yeah. So you start to think about that, right? A manager has a span of control, 7-to-1, 8-to-1, sometimes more.
Yeah.
So it becomes like dropping your kids off at Sunday school or CCD, right? The parents go grab a cup of coffee, pick up the Boston Herald while their kids are being taught by the teacher, right? But really, it's the parents that should be going to Sunday school. It's the parents that should be sitting in CCD. I actually taught CCD and tried to ask the priest to try to do that, but he rejected it. But the idea was like they're the ones who have to reinforce the values at home every day.
Yeah.
So
when the kid is doing whatever, they get into some sort of moral dilemma.
Exactly.
It's like you're there 1 hour a week. They're there the other.
Parents are the primary teachers.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Same thing with managers.
Yeah.
And so thinking about it that way. During the pandemic, the world turned on its head.
Yeah.
And managers who have had statistically the least amount of training became more important than ever, because it's not like you have before people overhearing each other in an office, or a manager just happening to overhear something and turn it over. Like I come from the background where when I was a manager, first manager, like you'd roll your chair down the lane and you'd put on the meat hooks and you'd listen in, and then you'd debrief right there. You'd say, how do you think that went? And you go through that, right?
Yeah.
But there's really no formal sales management training. Most of these folks receive the battlefield promotion on a Friday. Yeah. Congrats, you're the manager. Now on a Monday, they've got to manage their team, and there's a whole host of challenges with that. Yeah. Then you add on top of that 90% of these people went remote, or, well, during the pandemic, it was 100% remote. Yeah. There are people who are hired that had never been, they've never met in person. Yeah. And so now if you really think about it, that manager has infinitely more challenges. They can't see or overhear people, or vice versa. Those people can't overhear their peers. They have pressure and financial headwind in the market. They're overwhelmed with data. And so we set about to solve that. We believe managers are multipliers. That's our little tagline, making managers multipliers. And we believe that next to compensation, the biggest lever of behavior change in the rep is the manager. It's the one who's with them sort of day in and day out, week in and week out. However, we need to make sure it's much more intentional, which is why we are leveraging data from their tech stack to analyze it down to identifying root cause behavior issue and serving that up for the manager. I've read lots of stats about how few managers actually listen to calls. So as you know, there's a gazillion Gong competitors now. It's amazing. Yeah. And I know one of them said that 75% of managers report they've never listened to a call, and only 1% of managers, or 1% of calls were listened to by managers. So it's like, okay, you've got this treasure trove of data. How do we leverage it to help the managers help their reps? Yeah. So that's why we started the company, to really focus on that underserved market, but do so in a way that allows them to be much more intentional, to take the prep work and the guesswork out of every one-on-one and team meeting.
Yeah, it's a very underserved part of the market. There's so many pieces of sales tech for the rep. You've got contact info, you've got sales sequences, you've got the Gongs of the world, you've got all these different, we were talking about an AI cold call coach, like all sorts of different things, all for the rep.
Everything.
And there's really nothing for, outside of maybe forecasting technology, that a leader looks at consistently. So I'm curious, what do you think a frontline leader, frontline manager does? The best ones what do they do every week or every day that the average ones don't? Is it listening to calls? Is it something else?
I think if you zoom out, the best frontline managers understand that their success is via the agency of others. So they stop acting like a quote unquote sales manager, and they start thinking about themselves like a people manager. Sure. So first of all, their title is a misnomer. They do not manage sales. They manage the people who manage sales. Yeah. And the more that a leader can emphasize that, the more the frontline manager will start to think about themselves in those terms. Otherwise, what happens is they get into the role and they just act like a super rep. Yeah. And they default to what they know, which is working on deals, late stage deals.
Yeah. Joining calls.
Yeah. And my message to CROs out there is, like, you're part of the problem. Yeah. You are taking, in many cases, racehorses, and you're making them plow horses. All they become is forecast messengers. What's going on with this deal? What's going, like, they're reporting up and back. That's it.
Hey, where are we at? Where we at this core?
Yeah. And so if you then back out and you start to think about yourself as a people manager, then you start to say, okay, well, there's a life cycle. I've got to recruit, hire, onboard, coach and develop, and promote. Yep. That's the new cycle I'm working on, instead of the traditional, identify, land, adopt, expand, renew. Now there's a new cycle. So how do I do that? Do I have all the right players? How do I make sure that I'm bifurcating deal coaching, which you need to do, from developmental coaching? Yeah. And I have an example of what I mean by that, if it'd be helpful.
Yeah.
All right. So I feel like a good manager we'll deal debrief. And they'll say to the rep, okay, Tom, talk to me about this deal. Who's involved in the decision process? Oh, that's, Nicole. Okay. So let's say like Nicole loves everything we're doing here. Who's the one person that can say no and this deal is done? And the rep says, oh, that's Chuck. Okay. When you reach out to Chuck, what did he say? Well, I didn't quite get, like 99% of the time, they didn't reach out to the ultimate decision maker.
Sure.
Now we have to ask ourselves a question like, well, why, right? But let's just say in the moment, a good manager would smoke out, this rep didn't get to the ultimate decision maker, and they would give them some deal coaching. All right, Tom,
email Chuck.
Rep, like getting to the ultimate decision maker helps our deal become more winnable, right? Yeah, of course. Okay. So let me work with you on how we pull Chuck into this. How do we get Nicole to bring Chuck into the equation? And let me give you some guidance and coaching, maybe a little role play on how to get this to happen. Okay. So that's what a good manager does. Number one, they smoke out the gaps and they give them some coaching on how to fill those gaps per deal. A great manager zooms back and says, wow, this is the fourth time Tom has put a deal into commit where he's missing like critical information. This is a pattern.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can work upstream to fix this problem so this doesn't keep happening. So a great manager would then say, okay, let's work on the root cause of the problem, not just the symptom. How come you're not, what is it? Is it a head trash thing? Is it a mindset belief system? You're worried that you're going to lose a deal if you try to pull in. Is it that you're not asking the question of who's involved? What is it? Let's see if we can solve for that. If you solve for that fundamental issue, it helps all your deals subsequent to that become more winnable. Exactly.
Yeah.
Our biggest challenge has been finding leaders who understand that, because most leaders are like, hey, we just need to focus on deals. Again, getting back to that CROs in the role of 14, 16 months. And
they got a number to hit.
They have a number to hit. They get the board breathing down their neck. And so everything is about deals. And they're not solving fundamental root cause issues. So it's not one or the other. It's both. And that has got to be, I think the original question was about what do you recommend a frontline manager? I think frontline manager needs to view themselves as the people manager, and then they need to kind of think about the developmental part of the role, what they can work on at root cause in addition to the deal stuff.
Yeah. It's almost like if you think about it in a system or in an assembly line, you're getting it, and the good manager's finding it at step 7 out of 10. We identified, all right, in this case, we haven't reached out to Chuck. Let's figure that out, and let's keep the assembly line moving on that deal. But the next time the line goes, you're going to get stuck at 7. The great manager is identifying at the very forefront, we already can see through the tea leaves, this is going to be an issue. Let's figure it out. And then there's the question of, sales is in some part, we're talking about sales math at the beginning of this, some sort of like math science. And then sales is some sort of like a part art as well, which is maybe more of like, I call it the inner game of sales, but it's like the psychology of like, I'm afraid to reach out to Chuck because he might shoot down the deal. And it's really a fear-based. It's not that I don't know. Or there's like the skill science part of like every step after the first call, we need to make sure we have the economic buyer. What % of sales success do you think goes to like the math science part, and what % roughly do you think goes to like the art psychology?
I mean, I think if you break it down along 3 legs of the stool, the mindset or belief system part, the activity, consistent activity behavior part, and the skills or technique part, I think it's like 40% mindset belief system. I'd say it's 35% technique, and then the remaining 25% is the consistent behavior or activity. Now, that applies maybe more on conversion. If it's about pipe creation, it's obviously more about the behaviors and activities. Like you just have to get out there. You have to put in there's no shortcut. And when I say there's no shortcut, I mean, so you talked about our platform. We analyze just ridiculous amounts of data. We pull all the data from transcripts. We pull all the data from CRM and sales engagement tools. Yeah. We can get down to atomic level to say, wow, this rep is struggling to get meetings.
Yeah.
Okay, why? On the surface, they're in the top quartile for activities, right? But when you double click on that, you realize they're confusing activity for achievement. Most of those activities are automated emails. The top reps have less activities, but a higher percentage of them are calls and personalized or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, that's what I mean by you got to get down to the root cause to make sure you're working on that end of the problem. And I think if it's pipe creation or top of funnel, most of it is about, are you calling into your ICP? Are you first of all, are you doing the right amount of effort, period? Then based on that, are you effective? Right ICP, right types of buyers? Are you using the right modalities? How you're going to meet them? Is it calling or emailing or in-mailing or whatever? And then it's like, what's the content? What are you saying or doing during those brief interactions? So yeah, I think, it's a Rubik's Cube, and managers need to be thinking about that, because you could have 10 reps. This is what we discovered at LinkedIn when we work with Ryan there, is you could have, you could have lots of reps struggling to convert discos to demos. You could have 8 different reps all struggling at the same exact thing for 8 different reasons. And so you got to figure out what the heck is going on and give them the right sort of precision medicine to solve for that.
The other reason why I think this is interesting moving forward, I'm constantly thinking about like what is sales and what is tech sales going to look like in a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And I'm a believer in that there's going to be a version of a sales rep that is a quote unquote 10x rep. And maybe it's 3x or 5x, but way more productive. And I think we're starting to see a lot of sales teams, rather than just trying to double headcount, they're trying to do things more thoughtfully, and they're investing in the right tech, and they're investing in the skill sets of their people. And so it wouldn't surprise me if a sales manager had a higher ratio of reps that might report directly to them, or that teams run more leanly, but they can get really precise on what exactly does each rep need to be successful. So instead of 10 reps that each sell $1 million a piece, you might have half the amount of reps, but they're all doing 3 to 5 million a piece. And part of that is just like identifying skill sets. Part of that is, handing the right technology to them, the right training, all of that. But that's where I don't know if that aligns with you.
I do think that you're going to see a higher span of control in the future.
Yeah.
I think you'll see less enablement resources, and you'll see less. You'll see sort of more reps per manager span of control. What's interesting is sort of what jobs can be, sort of removed or replaced by AI and which ones can't. Our philosophy is that AI coaching of reps alone does not work. It will not work. And there's a lot of data and evidence of that came out of the call centers. They were some of the earliest to adopt this. Yeah. So it'd be interesting poll, but my philosophy is that an AI can't relate. It can't empathize, and it sure as hell can't hold people accountable. So if you think about what's a fundamental role of a manager, it's those things. It's especially the accountability piece. So I think you can have, one manager, 12 reps type of thing, and without cheating the reps, because the managers can use data. They don't have to spend all this time pulling data from all over the place to figure out what the hell's going on. They don't have to spend time listening to calls. It can all be done for them and served up. But you still are always going to need a human being to meet with a rep, even from a humane sort of, hey, how are things going? Like, what's going on? Something's obviously up, right? And having that human discussion to empathize with them. Maybe they have something going on in their personal life.
It's not so empty.
Right. Yeah. I mean, unless you give your AI the power to fire people, right? Or like, I just feel reps. I remember Gong sends out all these warnings, deal warnings, blah, blah, blah. People ignore it.
Yeah.
So again, we're talking about fundamental behavior change of human beings, of reps, which is tough. To get them to do something different, the manager will always be a critical piece. But to your earlier point, I think both rep and manager are going to have to up their game in a big way. They're going to have to leverage AI to make themselves much more productive. Yeah. And leverage that data to be intentional.
Yeah, agreed. I want to get a couple of rapid fires in.
Yeah, fire away.
Before we close out. We do have Nicole here. Nicole, do you have any questions for Colum before we do rapid fires?
I think my one question, you answered a lot of them that I had.
Let's give you
My one question, so it sounds like especially early in your career, there was a lot of fear moments. You both just talked about fear holding reps back. What would be your biggest advice to talk yourself or for a manager to talk a rep out of the fear that's holding them back from certain behaviors?
I would have the rep journal every single day. I'd have them sit down at their desk and write down, I'm financially independent and I don't need the business. I want it. I don't need it. If you have a rep that's struggling with getting to decision maker, I'd have them write down every single day for 2 months. Never let a person tell you no that doesn't have the power to give you a yes. That's an Eleanor Roosevelt quote. I can't either of those. But there's something about writing it down every day. I'm financially independent. I don't need the business. I want it. I don't need it. You can't lose a deal you don't already have. Because you just need to be gutsy like 5 seconds at a time when you're in sales. And someone told me when I was just getting on the phone, like, hey, Colum, no one's going to give you a black eye over the phone. So, a lot of people have call reluctance. Fundamentally, it's about dealing with rejection. In today's day and age, a lot of people struggle with that. Yeah. I would just remember it's not personal. They're rejecting the role of a salesperson, not the person, Nicole, right? So I think journaling really helps to remind yourself every day, just as a way to reinforce, fake it till you make it type of thing. Definitely. And then before you're long, you are financially independent. And it's amazing if you really just study this, and anyone who listens, I don't know if there are reps out there that are listening or if it's more managers, but if you think about it, are you more likely to ask tough questions if you've already made your number for the quarter and you have weeks to go and you're dealing with a prospect? Are you more likely to give a discount or not? Like, just think about your state of mind and what you are likely to do and are not likely to do once you've made your number. There's just like all sorts of freedom that comes with that.
Yeah.
And so that's because you feel financially independent. You don't need that deal. Like you know what I mean? You're like a hungry dog chasing a meat wagon type of thing at the end of a month just to win the deal. Yeah. I've got a buddy who calls it commission breath, but you're what you're really doing is you're setting yourself up. You're putting yourself in the best position to be a business person and not a desperate salesperson trying to pitch a product or peddle your wares. So I think what I would say early on, Nicole, about the fear is I'd be writing those things down.
Awesome. And I think also if you're writing it down, it boils down to if you are afraid of the rejection, well, what's scarier, asking, getting rejected, or not asking and still getting rejected one way or another because it's not happening.
Right. Yeah.
So what are you really afraid of?
Exactly. I think it's worth examining some of those things. I think a lot of people, happy years is a real thing. A lot of people don't want to know because they'll lose supposedly something, right? But I would argue it was never real to begin with. Yeah. So I'd rather work on fewer things that I feel are qualified than have a whole bunch of stuff in there that is like, we're hoping, close this without really believing it will.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah.
That's great.
I like that. Being gutsy for
great question. Yeah. Do you have an extra 5 here?
Yeah.
Colum?
Yeah.
Okay. I love that piece on the visualization. Do you personally journal, visualize, meditate, anything like around that world for yourself?
I started to, I didn't finish. I started a kind of a vision board type of PowerPoint. Yeah. So you ever read anything or seen Chase Hughes at all?
I don't know Chase Hughes.
Yeah. Worth Googling or looking up on YouTube. Fantastic.
Okay.
And he just talks about the power of visualizing and a vision board. And so his recommendation, get an old laptop, put a PowerPoint together and just have it rolling through, don't stop on your desk. And so I didn't quite finish that, but it's a good reminder. I have like one more slide to go, but I just got distracted. So, but that's, I think vision boards are really powerful. And I haven't journaled as of late. So, but I remember early days, it was some advice I was given by a guy called Mike Myers, who's a legend in the space. And Mike, had us write it down. And I remember sitting down, it was sort of like my cup of coffee. And as soon as I sat down at my desk, took my first sip, I was writing that down just as a way to stack a habit.
Yeah. Did you ever read To Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill?
I think so, a long time ago. It's a pretty short read.
Yeah. That was the first That was the first book that opened me up to, is my first sales job. That opened me up to like what a growth mindset was.
Yeah.
I just kind of figured, I always just thought of myself as like, oh, I'm a B minus student. I'm like okayly smart, but not that smart. Like other people are smarter than me. Other people are dumber than me. Other people are taller.
Yeah.
Better at this, better at that. And one of the, it's written in like the 1920s, 1930s. And one of the things that the guy has you do is, figure out like what's your one, I think he calls it his definite purpose book. What's your one goal? Mm-hmm. And you write it down. And you write down the date that you want it to happen, what it is in detail, and then what you have to sacrifice in order to get there. And so I remember I'm in my first year of sales, or, maybe like halfway through the first year. And I said I wanted to, make a certain amount of money, or I want to hit my quota for the first year. And so I wrote it down. You're supposed to read it every night, every morning when you wake up, and every night. So it's like have it on your bathroom mirror or on your nightstand. And so I do it the first, it's probably halfway through the year. So like the last 6 months, I'm like, I'm starting to kind of like transform things in my brain. So I'm still doing it. And by like the third year that I do it, I had a goal that I wanted to be the sales rep of the year at my company. And there's probably 50 or so people at the company across the world. And so I wrote it down, and I took it a step further that I would visualize it, because I went to a Tony Robbins conference, and I'm into some of the woo-woo stuff. And so I'm walking to work every day in San Francisco. It's like a 15-minute walk. And out loud, I'm speaking to myself we have our sales kickoff in Boston. I'm sitting in the 6th row, the second seat over. I'm wearing this. I'm sitting next to Colin. Steve Nemec's the head of sales. He's going to call my name. My face is going to show up. Steve's wearing a blue shirt. I walk up, shake his hand, and I'm saying this out loud. And you're talking about the crazy person in San Francisco, near the Gong office. That was me, saying all this out loud. But by the end of the year, that's what I did. I had the best sales year. I missed Q1, and I came back and had a phenomenal last 9 months, and it just cemented in me of like matching. Now you also have to like work hard and do well and get lucky and, all that stuff. But I'm a big believer in, matching the visualization or the mindset, or just like, you've got to believe. You got to believe in what you're selling. You got to believe in yourself. And even if I give you the right script or a great email template or whatever, but you don't have that, you're going to be capped on where you can go, in my opinion. That was one of the reasons I was asking you about that.
Yeah, I'm a full believer in that. I think you put a mental flag, you plant a flag, but it also allows you to then work backwards and how you're going to get there. So you build a plan. And I had an old sales leader who said, plan your work and work your plan. Yeah. So in sales, you're not closing a deal every day unless you work, a super high transaction business. But you can sort of hang your hat up at the end of the day, rest your head on the pillow, knowing you put in a hell of a week and you got that much closer to achieving your goal because you execute on all those behaviors. Yeah. I knew I needed to make 60 calls. Like I made 75 a day on average. I got, X amount of meetings. Like I know I didn't close a deal, but it's going to happen. You trust in that math. And so I think the other benefit of putting that mental flag or writing things down in terms of your goals is then you reverse engineer a plan to get there. Yeah. So it makes it a lot easier if you can break it down to like, okay, every day I need to do this. I remember sitting at my desk and I like make 9 before 9. That was my goal, right? 9 calls before 9, and keep this little ticker, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's just a way to kind of keep yourself accountable to that, ultimately that goal. But it's like one thing at a time, one day at a time, or one, hour at a time, whatever the case is. You're not so focused on this lofty goal. And that can be a thing that a lot of reps struggle with, is they get this big quota. It's like, oh my gosh, this is huge. How the hell am I going to do it? Yeah. But if you just deconstruct it down to very small incremental bites. Yeah. And same as a leader too. If you have 8 reps. Yeah. Especially when you're not the one making the calls, you don't necessarily control the exact outputs on everyone on the team. Giving yourselves those, you're like, hey, my goal this week is I'm going to come up with a coaching plan for each of the 8 reps, or I'm going to listen to 30 calls and coach, whatever it is, your inputs, and like be able to track those for yourself and say, if I do this every day or every week, I'm going to put us in the best chance to win, and we'll let the score kind of figure itself out. But like I'm going to put the inputs in. Yeah, they are spot on. I think that emphasis on manager behavior, manager activity, manager cookbook is extremely important and often forgotten. Even if they did it well as a rep, they sort of chuck it out the window and they become a manager. It's
Yeah.
like I always ask managers, did you role play? You ever role play with another rep? I'm like, yeah, I used to do that. Okay. How often do you role play with other managers about dealing with a rep who gives you an excuse? How often do you role play with another manager before you have a tough conversation with your rep or put someone on a plan or interview someone? Like, how are you working on your craft? And it's surprising. People don't even think about it. So they get promoted to that role and all that sort of stuff goes out the window.
That's such a I've never heard anyone bring that up as a point. Practicing and role playing, like having a tough conversation, having a tough one-on-one, letting someone go, whatever it might be. It's interesting. All right, I got a couple rapid fires for you.
Okay.
What's one book that has either impacted you personally as a seller, leader, person, or one that you might recommend to someone that's early on in their career?
So I love Chris Voss's book. I thought that was great. By the way, it's a lot of sort of techniques that are grounded in the same methodology that I came from. So I would highly recommend his book, Never Split the Difference. For managers or anyone aspiring to be manager, best book I've read in a long time is called Legacy by James Kerr, Kerr. My brother-in-law, who ran training for the West Coast Navy SEALs, he recommended that book, and he had all his officers read it, and man, he was right. It's a fantastic book. So anyone who's aspiring to be a leader or is in a leadership role, Legacy by James Kerr.
Okay. I've not heard of that one. I like it though. What's one thing that you do outside of work to stay, kind of mentally sane and have some fun?
Okay. Don't laugh at this, but I play in the bagpipe band.
Oh, hell yeah.
In fact, we're heading over.
You don't have it in your bag, do you?
No. And it's a kilt. It's not a skirt.
Yeah.
But so pretty active with the bagpipe band.
Nice.
I play in a men's soccer league, and I used to roll jiu-jitsu, but haven't in a while. So try to stay active and exercise creative juices on in the bagpipe band.
What's going on the Colum Lundt Spotify or wherever you're listening to music? What are you plugging in?
Man, I'm boring. So I'm a big 80s music fan. So I listen to a lot of English bands from the 80s, Jam, XTC, Clash, Echo and the Bunnymen, all those types of bands. But I listen to a lot of bands from the 90s as well. So I'm going to Coldplay concert next week.
Heard they're amazing live.
Yeah, supposedly. I've got tickets, so we'll see. Nice. Boston on the 16th. Yeah,
love it. All right, before we wrap up and let you kind of tell people where they can find you and whatnot, this is coming. We even prefaced it with some referral talk earlier, but everyone's got to, before they leave the podcast, has to give at least one person they'd like to see come on the show, with the caveat is that you have to actually know them and maybe possibly help me get them on if they're being tough to reach. So who is that person or people for you?
Yeah, there's a handful of people, but I would say Matt Benelli.
Okay. So, you don't need to limit it at one, but go ahead.
Yeah. So Matt Benelli is, he and I worked together at RPG, the company we sold to Sandler, and then at Sandler, and then when we kicked off CoachEM, and he is a student of the game. He lives and breathes this stuff. So I'll help you get Matt on. Yeah,
love it. Colum, before we go, where can people find you? I'm sure LinkedIn.
Yep, LinkedIn. Website is CoachEM.io, CoachEM.io. We say CoachEM if you want to keep them.
I like that.
And yeah, so either LinkedIn, my email is just column@coachem.io. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out that episode. Two quick things as a takeaway. Number one, we would feel honored if you left a review wherever you're listening to this podcast, if it's on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, to just let us know how we're doing, what else you'd like to see. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can check us out at tasales.co. Love to hear from you there. Much love. Have a great week.